My name is Scott Burke, and I'm the Associate Vice President and Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Georgia State University. Summer melt is a phenomenon by which the students that confirm to come to your university may or may not end up at the university in terms of the actual matriculation process. And so for Georgia State, one of the challenges that we had experienced between 2014 and 2015 was a continued increase in the number of students that were dropping off over what they consider to be the summertime. We were in the process of looking at other texting vendors, and we had already been working with AdmitHub with their free forum that they provide to students who have questions about the admissions process or the enrollment process. So we were already an AdmitHub client, and when I was describing for them that we were in the process of trying to find a vendor that could help us with a solution to our summer melt issue, they said, we've got this bot, we've got this opportunity that we could utilize this platform to reach out to students in a more personalized way, which was completely different than any of the other texting vendors that we were looking at that time. There are many things that set AdmitHub apart from other vendors that we were looking at. We were wanting to find a vendor that allowed us to have a two-way conversation with students via text. We had already email communications established and personalized outreach through phone calling and all that. But what we really felt like we were lacking was the ability to nudge students to do things and then to have those conversations over text. We were not just looking for a one-way conversation with a student. We wanted ways that we could more personalize that particular process. The AdmitHub folks are much more of a partner than just treating Georgia State like a client. You know, they were very responsive in listening to what our needs were. We took their expertise and we were able to come out with what I considered to be probably one of the best projects that I've ever been on, including this being a research project. Not only was this to help us improve the things that we do every day in the admissions process, but it allowed us to be part of a research paper ultimately that other colleges and other universities and perhaps other clients will be able to take a look at and see why Georgia State was so successful. If I had went with another texting vendor, I probably would have needed to hire anywhere between 10 to 15 additional staff members. So after implementing AdmitHub into the admissions process and yield enrollment process, we saw three very distinct changes in terms of the percentage. We saw a decrease in the percentage of students that we were losing from a summer melt perspective. So we went from 18% down to 14%. We saw an overall increase in enrollment at about 3.9%, which was about 300 more students than the previous year. And we saw the percentage of students that were going through the FAFSA verification process at 16% decrease. My recommendation for AdmitHub is nothing but a strong endorsement for a company that gets higher education, understands the importance of providing quick responses to students ultimately in this process, because sometimes it can be a very small thing that makes a student decide to go to another institution. And I never want it to be that we didn't provide the best personalized service that we possibly can to each and every student that applies and got admitted to Georgia State. And that, to me, is what AdmitHub was able to help us do ultimately. They helped us become more personalized, to have more targeted and better outreach to students. Yes, it was a risk, but we had high expectations that this was ultimately going to work because we had tried a number of interventions on our own that were not improving upon the number of students that we were losing. And something also that was a bit surprising was that we didn't have more questions going to human beings. Pounce was able to answer more than 80% of the questions that were going to him. And so we didn't have to route as many questions ultimately to humans. It was around 1% or so that actually needed to be routed to a human being. I think for at least the admissions staff, many of them who have been involved in this project from day one, so the recruitment staff, have really connected with it because they're the individuals that get questions that Pounce can't answer. So they get the questions back from Pounce to respond to a particular student. Or during the process, a student can say, I'd like to speak to a human, and then that question gets routed back to an admissions counselor for a particular territory. So I think they have a very high confidence in Pounce and enjoyed being part of the project. If you were just thinking about this as a texting option, it is much more than that. It is the opportunity for you to be more personalized, to be more conversational with students in an area where you didn't think that could happen. And I was skeptical about that. And all of a sudden I started seeing these conversations happening with Pounce that rivaled in many ways what a human was doing. I never would have expected that to ultimately happen. So I was skeptical going into this, but at the end of the day, the results prove themselves. I do feel that it's not only my responsibility to continue to seed Pounce with questions, but the admission staff and the university. We didn't just take this as solely an admissions issue. This is an enrollment issue. This is an enrollment problem. And so we involved other offices from across the university, whether it was AdmitHub directly working with those offices or it was my office reaching out to them. You know, I take absolutely being one of the chief enrollment officers at Georgia State, I absolutely take responsibility ensuring that Pounce has all the knowledge that he needs to help us be successful. We were not just looking for a one-way conversation with a student. We wanted ways that we could more personalize that particular process. And so we started with about 200 knowledge-based questions that eventually, at the end of our first year, we ended up with over 1,250 responses to questions for students through this. And we were doing it in an automated fashion. We had students' questions that were answered in as little as 7 seconds. And for the student themselves, they knew they were chatting with a bot, but they didn't necessarily feel like it was chatting with a bot. I was a little bit nervous that would this intervention actually work and would a bot be able to do it? And now that I know and have seen the results, I know that this is something that other colleges and universities should be looking to utilize.